Hello, I'm Dan Moyane. Welcome to hashtag Connect Africa Moyane, where we seek to enrich people's minds by sharing African experiences and stories that hopefully can contribute to a transforming continent. We are continuing to talk now with Daliso Ngoma, second part of our discussion. Let's continue your journey now. Back to South Africa in 2017. You've had this wonderful iOS exposure. You've traveled around the Southeast Asia, different parts, different experiences. Sadly, the Japanese don't know what they're missing because you never got to go to Tokyo. But on a serious note, you come back now with that knowledge. 2017, you come back to South Africa. How is that experience? Because it's different worlds.
It is a different world. Partly when I left, it was a case of I'd already planned a resignation. It was more towards work. It wasn't actually quite fulfilling. Partly, I think, because it was a startup, I was actually asking for like a performance review and the likes. It wasn't really fulfilling. I was actually wanting to at least build my experience in a sense. So it felt like I just stagnated in one form or another. And when I got back, I had actually initially applied for a variety of jobs within the iOS space. So I think the view that I took was, regardless of where exactly I came from and where exactly I studied, I would still be able to qualify myself and actually build myself in that sort of experience. So it was primarily having a conversation with my dad where he was like, yeah, instead of actually working for someone else, why don't you start something of your own? So that was primarily the spark where I was like, yeah, initially that's what I wanted to do after getting quite a lot of experience, and then bringing that back to South Africa. So I was always still going to come to South Africa. It was just primarily wanting to build those experiences, exposure, connections, and see as to how I can actually implement that in South Africa and Africa as a whole.
So you started your own initiative in 2017 as soon as you landed back from Malaysia.
So,
and what was that?
So that necessarily is the start of African Technopreneurs. And funny enough, what actually happened is that the people that I'd actually been working with before, they continued paying me for I think another 1 or 2 months for me to finish a project that I had tried to offload onto the next employee who was actually still there. But I think it was just a sense of, obviously I always take the approach of leaving the place 5% better rather than 5% worse. As in, if you compound the good experiences, people always remember you for that.
And it's also professional to ensure a smooth handover.
Exactly.
And finish whatever project if you can.
And
you did those 2 months and then you finished with them. And then you started Afropreneurs.
African Technopreneurs.
African Technopreneurs.
So from there, initially we actually started with web development. So I was actually just taking over another business that was already in place, which is website development and the likes. Because of me always being transactional when it comes to knowing the numbers of any sort of business, when I did the numbers, I was like, okay, it doesn't really make much sense. Most people these days can actually create their own sort of website, right? And actually on the cheap. So people actually doing it for other people, you would have to have something that is a differentiator in a sense. And I think that's what necessarily happened, where we continued building websites for quite some time. But I was just trying to look at what would be something exceptional for us to actually
How would you
on.
Distinguish yourself?
Exactly.
You have to have that unique selling proposition and stand out.
True.
And what was it for you?
So that was actually a 360 camera. So late 2017, the idea that I had was more towards, firstly, I played around with the 360 camera. It was a Xiaomi Miyagi Mi Sphere. I remember that very
What was it?
A Xiaomi Miyagi Mi Sphere, a 360 camera. So it's a very long name, but yeah, most people call it the Mi Sphere 360 camera. And when I got this camera, initially I didn't really know what to do with it because I had already had a camera or DSLR. I got that because I always wanted to get into photography. Initially, the excuse I was saying is that, I can't take good photos or whatever. So then one friend told me, just use your iPhone or just use your phone. So I used my phone, learned how to deal with the aperture, the shutter speed, and ISO levels and the likes. And then I decided to now get myself my own sort of camera. And when getting a 360 camera, it was actually just using those same sort of principles. So whatever was learned in the past was actually now brought into the future. And the thing about a 360 camera is just the ability of being able to capture everything all at once. You didn't have to turn the camera, you just placed it there, you took a picture, and you could even record videos as well. So you can just imagine if, for instance, there was a whole crowd and there was a whole lot of activity happening, people could actually move their heads around and actually see exactly what's happening.
So you started importing these 360 cameras
Yeah.
for you to supply in South Africa. Was that your business model?
So initially, the business model was actually supposed to sell what I was doing as a service to real estate agents. So I was looking for a place of my own. I had the frustration of obviously driving to these places because every single time on their websites, they would have these pictures. They all look nice. You get there, you're like, okay, this is not what I expect. So that was the initial pitch, that if, for example, there was more 360 content, pretty much like Google Street View, but obviously indoors, that it would actually make it easier for people to already make those decisions rather than actually having to spend so much time going to a place, seeing it, and then not being satisfied.
Was it easy to convince clients?
Not at all. So that necessarily got me to switch my model. Rather than actually selling them as a service, I thought nobody is actually selling these products in mass in the country. So that's why I switched the model from selling a service to selling the product.
And how did that take off?
So initially, what happened is that I did my product research, bought 4 of the top cameras. So the one was a Garmin, the other one was a GoPro, the other one was the Insta360, and then I think the other one was another one called Candao. And initially, I built a Shopify website, also learned how to actually list myself onto Takealot, got the cameras put on there, and actually just saw as to how people would actually be buying. And then 2018 happened where that actually changed the whole scope of what I was actually doing.
Now, as you're talking and answering these questions, I'm thinking here, as a young person,
Yeah.
in South Africa today and the rest of Africa, leaders talk about the 4th industrial revolution.
Yeah.
They talk about the need to empower young people.
Yeah.
Talk about the need to supporting small and medium businesses.
Yeah.
That will include startups.
Mm.
Has it been your experience that we are doing that? We talk it. I hear it all the time in speeches by the presidents of these republics on our continent.
Yeah.
I hear it from organizations that supposedly fund small business.
Yeah.
You are there in the front line. Are you getting the support?
Not really, not really. I think the approach that I took, even when it came to sales, was that my friends and family are not going to be my market. It's outside market. So I really didn't get that much support. It was actually quite funny when we even applied to get ourselves incubated at the Innovation Hub, where when we're talking, this is when I actually had my first employee with me, that we said that we wanted to join because obviously we wanted to be a part of an ecosystem. And funny enough, they were like, but it doesn't seem like you guys really need our help, in a sense. So I haven't really seen that much support. It has primarily been on my front to actually try and educate more people to know about the technology. So when we talk of 4IR, it's always been this mystic catchphrase that's always been used. But for me, I'm like, technology is technology. It's just a tool. 4IR, 5IR, you always just have technology. It just serves the purpose of what is the need on the ground and actually implementing it for that use case.
You have these different parts of the continent with innovation hubs.
Yeah.
As we're talking about them, you know, your Tsimlohongs, but there's one in Nairobi and you said you were there.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience.
Well, hopefully it's the right one, the iHub. I was there, funny enough, for an event called HackerX. So to keep it simple, it's speed dating for developers. So you might be wondering like what that's all about, but literally is that developers would actually sit in front of multiple companies in order to actually just get like a speed date in a sense, rather than I suppose the traditional CV route in one from another, a few drinks, food, just to have a good time. So it was actually an opportunity. Because of the speed dating, you get to bounce around and see quite a lot of these companies as well. And quite a few of them were startups that were also trying to hire. So when looking at the environment, you could see that they were truly trying to get more people within that space. And I think when you look at development, quite a lot of the stuff in the East is picking up. I've even got contacts who are in the VR space. Funny enough, I actually met them in the US for whatever odd reason, who are actually also pushing the 4IR if we talk about that.
The Innovation Hub
Yeah.
in Nairobi, you were there, and it was this speed dating thing.
Yeah.
That's by the private sector or by public sector?
No, private sector. So that was because I had actually volunteered for the same initiative. This was in Malaysia. And this was actually just a startup from San Francisco. So they were literally also just trying to spread themselves around the world with the same sort of concept. And they had one representative there. I volunteered, funny enough, when I came back to South Africa. that's when they were like, hey, we want to actually spread this Hacker X into South Africa. Would you be keen to be our country?
And that's when I came to hear about you with this hackathon thing
Yeah.
that you did in Johannesburg
Yeah.
in December 2020. Is that the new way now of trying to find these new developers and come up with new ideas? And you had young people from 10 African countries.
Yeah, so it was actually remote, so we're all scattered in a variety of places. And yeah, if we talk of the hackathon, they've been happening for quite a long period of years. I wouldn't necessarily say that it would be the best breeding ground, but it's more of a case of getting people exposed to the technology and being able to hack something in a short period of time.
And is it working?
It is working, as in, I think even when we talk of the hackathon, funny enough, I actually got in contact because we've got a VR community here in South Africa.
That's virtual reality community.
Yeah, virtual reality, pretty much I would say XR, so AR, VR, MR, all these fancy terms, but really just trying to get more people into the space. So we've got a community here run called We Are VR, and that necessarily touches towards the West as well, and even East Africa as well. So we're really trying to get more people into the space, because again, is that we just don't want to miss this leap of technology.
Daliso, you doing all this connecting all these various virtual reality communities from West Africa, East Africa, and everywhere on your own as private sector with no government support.
Pretty much. I presume some of the people within our network might actually have that government support, but primarily us as a community, it has primarily just been our own efforts of actually trying to get people in. So even trying to get the hardware in and all that other stuff, that's probably one of the endeavors that we want to do.
But how can Africa then leapfrog other players in Southeast Asia, in the world, your Indias of this world, using this technology to enable development? Because we need to do so.
True.
What are your thoughts?
So I think it's primarily getting more businesses up and running, at least on my side. That's why one of the initiatives that I had, this was late 2019, when there was a whole unemployment stats or whatever, I just put out a tweet to say, hey guys, if anybody doesn't have a job, degree, no degree, just send through your CV. I got flooded with a whole lot of CVs, but the main fact is that the people who are actually working with me don't necessarily even have...
was this as African Technopreneur?
Yeah, African Technopreneurs. So those are the initiatives to actually try and see if, for example, I can plant the seed in the people who are working with me. And hopefully if they can actually multiply and actually start something of their own. Even like, for example, with the likes of the hackathons and such, if we can get that exposure, it probably should actually surmount to something.
If you had to advise the presidents or the African Union, they're having an African Union Heads of State Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in this respect, what would you ask them to do?
I'd ask them to actually try and look into more funding opportunities, because I think if you look at most of the tech companies, they've actually had surmountable amounts of funding. You look at the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, where I think if you were to look at them in investment terms, they're pretty much the biggest VC on a country scale, where actually they pump in and have that 5-year plan of actually being able to look at what are the new technologies that we have to be a part of.
So funding is not about political will, it's really about give us the funds and we ourselves as the tech people will be enabled and do the things that we need to do.
And also I think getting more people who've started businesses to actually assist. Because again, is that, for instance, I think you always have that issue of if people haven't started businesses of their own, and you can't necessarily get those same people to now bring up the new generation, it becomes quite hard. As in, you can always have these people, be it that it's in the academic field, nothing wrong with that, or be it that it's even in the political sphere, nothing wrong with that. But probably people who've already started businesses are always touching new problems. They're not theoretical, they're the things that they have to see right there on the ground.
Yeah, you've traversed South Africa as a boy with your father, the mining engineer, going from town to town. You've been around the continent, and you've been to Asia. And even in Asia, you didn't spend only your time in Malaysia when you're doing your degree. And you've come back home, and you've learned quite a bit in this space. And you're still busy with African Technopreneur, trying to do your part, and with the hackathons as well, in terms of developers and stuff. If you look back now, a younger 15-year-old Daliso, what advice would you give him today, knowing what you've gathered and you've learned along the years?
I think it's to try and be a bit more unconventional. I think just the convention of going through the schooling system, to a large degree, I think it's still tied towards the industrial age, where people went through the schooling system to be prepared for the workplace. But with the way that now everybody can actually start their own sort of business, like even Shopify is being referred to as arming the rebels, that anybody can actually start their own sort of online store and the likes. Of actually just trying to see as in how can I actually learn things which are actually outside of my scope. Try and get more towards the fringes. Because I think when you touch things that not a lot of people do, and I think with my own sort of experience of moving around, you end up seeing things from different angles.
Should young people get involved in manufacturing? I mean, Africa
Yeah.
doesn't make much of its own stuff. We
Yeah.
import a lot of stuff from
True.
China.
Yeah, so I would actually encourage that. That's actually one of the things that we're looking at for the long term. Funny enough, one of the people within our community, Eden Labs, have actually made their own VR headset. This was in combination with a Chinese manufacturer. But hopefully, if, for example, we can actually do the manufacturing here, it just makes it so much easier. And even in terms of the tariffs that have been waived with the new agreement that have come in place, it just makes it so much more vibrant. And I think there are a whole lot of people who want to get into the space, but because firstly, there's no infrastructure for them to actually start their own sort of company, probably not even the support to actually get that going, and even the funding to at least see that, for instance, you might be sustaining losses, but how can we necessarily make sure that it's measured in order to actually see that you succeed in the long term?
As a young African, are you hopeful about our continent's future technologically?
Yeah, I am. As in, I think that was partly the reason why I even came back. I see that there's that hope and opportunity, that everybody's actually trying to do their very best, even though things are quite hard. I think we look at Africa, it's probably the youngest continent with the oldest leaders. But the reality with that youth, you actually get quite a lot of vibrance. So even with my company, everybody is actually below the age of 30, right? And just on the basis that, hey, we can all just try and learn from the youth, and obviously taking the wisdom of people who are actually older. But again, as in the youth are going to be the ones who still stay after the elders are actually gone. So again, we necessarily have to build that culture. So at least the generations even that are going to come afterwards, that we can get them into that right space. But yeah, it's, I think, multifaceted, but I'm just trying as much as possible to help with a variety of community members as well, to see as in how can we actually push the agenda and hopefully get more people recognizing us. Because I'm less for the PR in terms of like being in front of the news, but really trying to do the foundational work in order for people to actually build on top of that.
That's very sensible, and we wish you well. Thank you very much, Daliso, for your time.
All right. Thank you.